Alright, let's see how this goes. Let's pull it up. My computer might be a little too underpowered to even handle this much. I don't know. So we're gonna find out together if it is or not. I don't think it's actually gonna let me go live until the timer's here. Or no, maybe. Alright, let's see how this goes. Alright, I mean that's like a 3-minute delay though, I think. Oh well. So long as y'all can hear me, because that's all that matters. That really is all that matters. Because I'm not gonna have any extra video or no gameplay. Reason why I'm doing this on PC and not PS4 is because I didn't want to get distracted with gameplay. Though if this doesn't work out, if like my computer crashes, which I don't think it will, I think it'll just chug along like really slowly. Um, but if something does go absolutely wrong, I do have a really great map on Jurassic World Evolution that I could just chill out at on sandbox mode and just ride around in the Jeep while I talk. Horsehead asks, "Did you watch Rise of Skywalker yet?" No, I've heard some things though. I'm not going to get into that. By the way, if y'all are joining us, welcome to my decade in review, where I'm going to look back on the last 10 years of entertainment and culture and give my thoughts on the best and the biggest. I'm not going to delve into like worst or like most detrimental, except maybe with some culture stuff. I'll touch on that, but I kind of want to keep it positive on this stream. I will be doing a year in review after Christmas. The main thing I want to wait on is, well, actually, there's two, and they're both Star Wars related. Um, I want to wait until I've seen Rise of Skywalker, and I want to wait until I've played at least a little bit of Jedi Fallen Order, which I've been avoiding because I don't want to get spoiled. Even though there's that one ever-present ad that spoiled, Vader being in the game. Like, oh, come on, guys. Wait, let me tweet this out. I'm live with my. Let's add a hashtag. Decade in review stream. Yeah, try. I do want to go into it as fresh as possible, so please, if you will, avoid Rise of Skywalker spoilers. I'm gonna add everyone in Discord and see how many people get pissed. And let people in the tundra know. Okay, it's still the last thing I posted, so I'm just gonna say going live. Yeah. I take it y'all can hear me. I know I did like a little test with my headphones just to see, but you never know. This is the first time I've streamed from this computer, like ever. This is the first time I've ever streamed from this computer. Um, I stopped streaming with my previous computer because it would just keep crashing, um, and then I streamed a lot from PS4. mostly because that's the console I have Jurassic World Evolution on, and Jurassic World Evolution is fucking dope. I might talk about it a little bit more, and nah, no. It's not one of the best, it's not one of the biggest, but it's one that I keep finding lots of entertainment with, despite it kind of being an all-around dull game. So, to we only have 11 days left in this decade, and what a decade it's been. On the whole, say certainly more interesting than the 2000s were. The 2000s were kind of monotonous. Homogenous. Homogenous is the word I want to use to describe the 2000s. We had a pretty good idea of what music was supposed to sound like. We had a pretty good idea of what blockbusters were and what they were supposed to look like. This decade, not so much. There's been a lot of changes. And it's the first time that multiple industries have went through any kind of like drastic change since the early 90s. In the early 90s we had the simultaneous we had music changing because of Nirvana. We had the movie industry changing with the indie market booming, and then the big studios then taking over the indie market after the 1-2-3 success of Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, Robert Rodriguez's Desperado, and Kevin Smith's Clerks. Really made it like, oh wow, you mean we can make billions of dollars on a movie that only cost us millions? And then that's when the big studios like Fox and Disney and Warner Brothers, that's when they started investing in their own indie studios, which is what quote unquote indie is now. Is it's actually just all these big studios skipping out on budgets and saturating the lights to make it to fool hipsters into thinking it's deeper than it actually is. And at the same time you had that going on, you had Nirvana killing off hair metal and music changing and gangster rap rising. And at the same time as that, you had the video game industry going through much more objective changes as far as like, oh wow, 3D technology is a thing, and we could actually use that to create these more expansive worlds and whole new genres of games. But after like 1994-ish, things stopped going forward, or at least they stopped going forward so drastically. Music kind of stayed the same for music, movies, games, comics. They kind of stayed the same up until actually just a couple years ago, earlier this decade. Professor LS asks, thoughts on YouTube Rewind 2019? Possibly the best YouTube Rewind, honestly. I didn't actually watch all of it, but I watched enough to get a general feel. It was like, okay, yeah, this is actually what YouTube Rewind should be. It's a little more objective. It's like, okay, here's the big YouTubers that from this year. Here's the big YouTube events from this year. Here's the videos that got the most views. Here's the videos that got the most likes. Here's the independent creators that got the most views and likes. Here's the independent views and here's the independent views and creators that got the most subs. Here's the ones that got their plaques. Here's the big industry YouTube channels like Vivo. Here's their biggest and best videos, their most liked videos, their most subscribed to videos, their most viewed. It was like, okay, yeah, this is what YouTube Rewind should have always been. Whereas previous YouTube Rewinds were basically just a bunch of memes and a bunch of people who aren't actually big YouTubers. Like 2018, you had like Ninja and Will Smith and was it Colbert or was it Kimmel that was in YouTube Rewind 2018? It was one of the like late night talk show hosts guys. Like, you're not a YouTuber. You're on fucking CBS or ABC, depending on who it was. But let's talk about the game changer. I just made a tweet about this an hour ago while I was, kind of preparing some notes for this stream. One of the things that made this decade so much more interesting, and I say interesting, not better. I think movies were better in the 2000s. I think music was better in the 2000s. I think games were better in the 2000s. I think books and every TV, all better in the 2000s. The only thing that was better in the 2010s was animation, and Japanese animation in particular. But the thing that made this decade so much more interesting was how much new stuff there was. Like, love it or hate it, this decade gave us, mumble rap, bro country, the return of EDM as EDM, which is actually just an updated version of house music, which hadn't been relevant since the early 90s. We had dubstep, trap, soul, trap soul, like Zayn from One Direction, right? So you had all that, and that was just in music, and you had this the explosion of indie rock, which I'll get to when I get more into like what happened with the music industry and why it got to this point. And it's all really building to me doing this whole fucking dissertation on Lil Nas X's existence because I find it fascinating. Old Town Road is an okay song, but the story behind that song and why it got so big and how big it is compared to what isn't big is fascinating. And I didn't think it was possible, but looking back on it now, it's like, oh my god, it makes so much perfect sense. It's just Lil Nas X and Old Town Road is just the culmination of things that had been building, from the return success of Adele in 2011, the 1-2 punch of Gautier and Fun in 2012, another 1-2 punch of Lorde and Macklemore in 2013, the explosion of EDM in 2014, 2015 with the Chainsmokers, and the election of Donald Trump. Like, we're gonna have to talk about that because, yeah, this whole decade has been defined by industry outsiders getting successful and completely changing the industry that they're in. The only exception I can think of that is film. Film is still dominated by the same powers that were dominating it throughout the 90s and 2000s, and that's why movies especially have been really hollow this decade compared to previous decades. And yes, there's always exceptions. We're going to talk mostly about the exceptions. But art this decade was very dour, very dull. But movies were the only ones that I don't think were very interestingly dull. Video games have a lot of nuance that led to them being meh this decade. And same thing with TV shows and animation, and especially with music. I'm going to talk a lot about music because I don't get to, because of the nature of my channel, I don't actually get to talk about pop music a whole lot, even though I am actually pretty into pop music. Though I feel like I should, completely renounce my credibility for saying that. So yeah, let's get into that in a minute because I want to talk a little more personally. Because I was just thinking that 10 years ago, I was a sophomore in high school in a small town called Clever, Missouri. And now I'm a 26-year-old man talking on YouTube to right now 11 people watching about, and I'm talking about like movies and music and games, and I'm living in a basement in South St. Louis, and it's just so strange to think that it's been 10 years since back then. But let's talk about music first because I think music is the most interesting thing to go on this decade. Let me pull my notes back up. Professor LS, what the your favorite and least favorite years? Overall, for me personally, best was actually 2016. 2016 was the year that I started on YouTube. It was the year I started on fanfiction, started on Ruby On. It was, it was just a really great year for me. I was in a bunch of really cool classes in college. I spent a semester in the UMSL dorm that year, and that was really great. Met a lot of really awesome people. A lot of the same people that I talk to on a pretty regular basis now, I met in 2016. People like Kitty Kirishima, High Power, Dude What the Heck, Socklicard. I met all those people in 2016. And so 2016 would have to be my favorite year of the decade. And my least favorite year, 2018, because of all the, personal drama that went down in my life and, basically ruined me and led to the anxiety and depression that I suffer with today. And, yeah. But as far as, and I'll have, best and worst year for everything. So let's start with music. Best year for music, probably 2015. It's a toss up between 2012 and 2015. The other years were kind of meh. They'd have great songs, exceptions. There's always exceptions. And worst year, I'd have to say probably 2014. 2017 is up there as well. 2017 was a pretty dour year for music. 2014 was really dull though. 2014 was, well, I'll get to what the biggest song was here in a minute. But I'm gonna go year by year, and I'm gonna give my favorite hit song from that year and what I think was the biggest. And so for 2010, the best hit song that year was Fireflies by Owl City. That's my personal favorite. And that's what I mean by best in all these contexts. Fireflies is what kind of got me back into pop music after pop music and I kind of parted ways when I was in middle school. And I started listening to a lot more like old school stuff, a lot more old school blues and rock, and I just didn't listen to things that were out today until Fireflies, which was, in hindsight, way more influential than people give it credit for. Because what is Fireflies by Owl City? It is a dreary, almost lullaby-esque, synthetic pop song made by a single person who I believe was living in a basement at the time, got a massive marketing push because of social media, not because of a record label or industry insiders, and became one of the biggest songs of that year. And I know it technically came out in 2009. It was still on the pop charts for a long time in 2010. That's why I'm counting it here, because not only because of that, but because of the influence it had. So many hit songs from the last 10 years can be connected to Fireflies by Owl City. And the biggest song of that year was TikTok by Kesha. That song was everywhere. I kind of hate it, but I get the appeal. 2011, the best and the biggest are actually the same thing. Rolling in the Deep by Adele. That song is a jam. It's Adele's best song. But if I had to pick something else, because I can't not say that it was the biggest song of that year. So if I had to pick a second favorite, I would go Pumped Up Kicks by Foster the People, which again was kind of influential, though I wouldn't say it's as influential as Fireflies because it was kind of riding on those coattails. So here we have another, indie rock band with a little pop jingle rock, indie rock type song with a lot of synth in it, getting way bigger than it really had any right to, given who else was big that year. And then 2012 was the year that the door really got kicked open, and I think the decade really started. The decade really started in 2012, and we'll get to why. Well, actually, we'll get to why right here in a second. But this also goes for movies as well, where 2012, where 2010, 2011 was still kind of the 90s and 2000s all over again, and then 2012 happened, and boom, game changer. And the game changer here, in the biggest song of that year, Somebody That I Used to Know by Gautier. Once again, vaguely synthetic indie rock song made by someone nobody had ever heard of. And it became the biggest song of that year and led the way to, and directly, much more directly than Fireflies or Pumped Up Kicks, led to this kind of indie rock synth pop wave that has since dominated the pop charts. And the best song of that year, and my pick for best song of the decade, Some Nights by Fun. Fun is another one that was in that same vein. Their first hit song, We Are Young, came out right around the same time as Somebody That I Used to Know, and it was this really great 1-2 punch that, blew open the doors. But Some Nights is this decade's Bohemian Rhapsody. It's a song that just covers so many emotions and so much depth while also kind of being about nothing. And it's just batshit crazy, insanely good. 2013, my pick for best and biggest song come from the same person, but it's a different song. So the thing about change is that you can't just force it. You have to kind of out with the old, in with the new. And the song that really did that ended up being the biggest song of 2013, and one that really defined what I've been talking about as far as like how music changed this decade. And that's, of all things, Thrift Shop by Macklemore. You can make a direct line, a timeline connecting Thrift Shop success to Old Town Road success. Because Thrift Shop is about, well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about who it's by, Macklemore. And, whose second song is my favorite song of that year, which is Can't Hold Us. He's somebody who was a nobody before those songs, before that first album, The Heist, which is one of the best albums of this decade as well. Then he's a rapper. He's white. He's in his 20s. He's goofy. He's kind of comedic. He doesn't have any, not a single ounce of angst like you got from previous white rappers like Eminem. And here he is making a joke song about piss-smelling old clothes, criticizing within the lyrics of the song the whole blingin' bitches type rap that had been prevalent since the mid-90s. Now, rap had kind of been stuck in a rut ever since the death of, Tupac and Biggie Smalls in the mid-90s. It had kind of all turned into very samey sounding, and Thrift Shop really breathed new life into it. And yeah, we still get songs that are just about, fuck bitches, get money. But after Thrift Shop, you've seen a lot more diversity. You see this onslaught of sad rap, Lucid Dreams, which I'm not a fan of, but I had to mention because Juice WRLD just passed away at the ripe old age of 19, or was he 20? He was very young, is what I'm saying. He was a very, very young man. But he had songs like that, Lil Uzi Vert, Bad and Bougie, all the mumble rap songs, which grate on me, and I don't like any of them, but it's different, is what I'm saying. It's different than what was popular 10, 15 years ago. A song like Bad and Bougie would have never gotten radio play in 2006 the way it did in 2016, or whenever it came out. Uh, so then 2014, bad year for music. I would say Uptown Funk, but that was much more of a 2015 song, was the exception. So, other than Uptown Funk, I'd say the best song was Don't by Ed Sheeran. It's a pretty fun song. Nothing really special. And the biggest song was Happy by Pharrell. Again, nothing really special about it. 2015, the biggest song, also one of the best songs of the decade, Uptown Funk. And once again, if I had to pick a song that wasn't Uptown Funk to be my favorite song of that year, it would be Shut Up and Dance, which is a very 80s song by Walk the Moon. It takes a lot of cues from like Jesse's Girl and We Danced. So then 2016 is when things started getting dour, and yeah, I know a lot of people took the election of Donald Trump really hard. I personally didn't. I thought it was a good thing. But yeah. So best song of that year, I Took a Pill in Ibiza by Mike Posner. There's a lot of little lyrical details in that make it very interesting to listen to. And the biggest song of that year was Love Yourself by Justin Bieber, which is an okay song. I kind of dig it. It would be a lot better if it wasn't sung by Justin Bieber. I would prefer it if it was sung by Ed Sheeran. I think he'd be able to pull it off a lot better himself. 2017, I had to give a big shout out to this because my favorite album of this decade is Melodrama by Lorde. But she didn't manage to get any real big hits off of that. Like, the biggest hit was Greenlight, and it barely cracked the top 40. But I had to give a shout out to that. Every single one of those songs is really deep and nuanced and just full of this raw emotional power. And it's one of the best albums I've ever listened to. But another song that kind of taps that same vein came out that same year and came from a very unexpected person. And that is Kesha. Praying, which is haunting, and one of those songs that just, it kind of makes you uncomfortable for making fun of her, in her first, couple albums. And the biggest song of that year was Shape of You, which is awful. Ed Sheeran should be ashamed of himself for that one. Then 2018, best song, I went with Thank You Next. It's the only one I listened to on my own time. It's okay. And then the biggest was God's Plan, which is the most Drake song Drake ever draked. It's this perfect microcosm of Drake's entire appeal. He's a rapper who knows how to sing. Sometimes he's happy, sometimes he's sad. He does a lot of really good work, but he's also kind of full of himself about it. But at the same time, he is able to play humble, and he's able to play the victim and play... He's able to downplay himself a lot more than other people of his caliber. And that's his entire appeal. So I can totally see why God's Plan ended up being his biggest song as well. And then 2019, for best, I'm kind of torn between Sucker by Jonas Brothers and Lover by Taylor Swift. I think Sucker is a really good song. It's the best thing any of those guys had ever done. And Lover is a very good return to form for Taylor Swift. It's the Taylor Swift that I liked 10, 11, 12 years ago when she first started. And the biggest is Old Town Road, because 19 weeks out on top of the Billboard charts, new record, and this is what I was talking about with the indie appeal. Because with music, there's no real delineation between indie and mainstream. Music just kind of sounds like music. The differences within genre and actual, like, objective sounds. So the right push can make anything successful, and the wrong push can make anything fail, which is why 19-year-old shitposter making a goofy cell phone jingle rap about, riding horses can sit atop the throne for 19 ass fucking weeks, whereas one of the, you know, biggest artists of all time, Taylor Swift, can barely keep a single on the top 10 anymore. You know, she had 3 big songs this year: Lover, Me, and You Need to Calm Down, and none of them managed to clinch the top spot because Old Town Road just kept on fucking destroying all of its competition. Blade Charge, I will get to video games later. We're in the music section of this stream. I'm keeping it kind of compartmentalized like that, but I will talk all about games later. And who donated? I heard the jingle, but I didn't see the thing. But someone just donated. I'll keep an eye on the stream and see if I could. God, that's right. It's like a 30-second delay. I could probably just load up Streamlabs and find out. But I don't. Actually, you know what? My internet connection is pretty good right now. Now watch, by the time Streamlabs loads up, it'll have flash on the screen and I'll have missed it. Do 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 do. Should probably not sing because I don't want to get copyright claimed. Okay. It's not showing up on Streamlabs. Is there like a delay on that or something? Maybe it's on... No? How do I see past donations? Of this stream. I'm keeping it kind of compartmentalized like that, but I will talk all about games later. Oh, it was a subscriber. I heard the jingle, but I didn't see the. But I don't. Okay, yeah, it was a subscriber, not an actual. Connection is pretty good right now. Okay. Or was it? I don't know. The top 10 anymore. All of its thing. Someone just donated. I'll keep an eye on the stream. Of this stream. I'm keeping it. Okay. Da, 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 da. We'll talk all about games. Okay, yeah, it was definitely a subscriber. I just went back and double checked it. Okay. Let me pull the notes back out. Yeah. So, biggest I actually kind of wanted to do polls on Twitter for these. Biggest albums: Ed Sheeran's X, which was in 2014, Adele's 21, which was 2011, Taylor Swift's 1989, which was 2015, and Drake's Views, which I believe was the one with God's Plan on it. Best album, Melodrama by Lorde. Best song, Fun, Some Nights. Biggest song, or biggest songs I should say, Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars, Rolling in the Deep by Adele, Somebody That I Used to Know by Gautier, and Thrift Shop by Macklemore. Biggest singer, Taylor Swift. She's the one who got like the Artist of the Decade. She's had like the most kind of dominant chart success this decade. And breakout artist, for this I was like, okay, which artist cropped up at the beginning of the decade that continues to dominate today? And for that was Ed Sheeran. Ed Sheeran had his first hit song in 2010 with A-Team, and he has become one of the reigning, people in music. And I think that actually kind of concludes the music portion of this. So just a recap for anybody who's just joining us. Um, Music was interesting this decade, but not particularly good. Uh, so let's I don't actually have an order I specifically want to do this. But let's talk about video games since Blade Charge was wondering. Uh Video games sucked this decade. There's no way around that. This is the first decade where I feel like video games really took a step backwards. They declined in quality, objectively, in every sense of the word. Like all these big franchises and stuff are just continuously gutting feature sets from their games instead of adding stuff now. And the sandbox games, the loot shooters, the MMOs, the remakes, the HD re-releases. I get the appeal of HD re-releases because video games have never had a consistent format for the medium. And so, the HD re-releases I support in terms of record keeping. In terms of like making sure that these games don't ever truly go away and that we are able to preserve them. But when Sony is trying to say that Last of Us HD remastered version is worth $60 on PS4 just a year after its initial release on PS3, there's a problem. And that mindset continued throughout. There was a God of War 3 re-release on PS4 that was like $40. At least they didn't charge full price for that. The Sly Cooper thing. Like, Resident Evil 2 Remake might be one of the best games of this year, but it's still a remake. Where's the new shit? Like, even some of the best stuff that I'm going to talk about technically kind of started last decade. Minecraft technically started in 2009. It's the biggest game of this decade, and it had its initial, like, real release and its first console releases this decade, but it's still kind of a novelty carried over from 2009. Same thing with Dark Souls. Dark Souls, was this very revolutionary game. It completely changed things up. It made difficulty fun again, or popular again at least. But that was technically carried over from last decade. Same thing with the Arkham games. The Arkham games were very influential. Arkham City is one of the best games of this decade. And that rhythm combat system is a lot of fun and got used by a lot of different games. It's very influential. Arkham Asylum came out in 2009. Another, two of the other biggest games of this decade, Breath of the Wild and Skyrim. Those franchises started decades ago. Elder Scrolls started in the 90s. Zelda started in the 80s. And Breath of the Wild is actually just a return to form for Zelda, really. Red Dead Redemption's great game. It's basically just GTA in the Old West, and GTA is a relic from the 2000s. Deus Ex. Again, Deus Ex Mankind Divided is one of my favorite games of all time. It came out this decade in 2016. But it's Deus Ex, and Deus Ex started in 2000. And then there's just the ongoing debate with the game industry and whether it's art or not. I do plan on doing a video on like are video games art. I think they are, but they're not high art. There's a difference between high art and low art. High art is the personal, like, kind of auteur-driven expression, whereas low art is just supposed to get some kind of emotion out of you. It doesn't matter who it's by or how many people it's by. So, like, the biggest games this decade were like Minecraft, Skyrim, Fortnite, and Overwatch. And of those, the only one that had a story was Skyrim. Best game of this decade is Arkham City. Well, I don't know. Deus Ex Mankind Divided. It's a toss-up between those two. It's a toss-up between those two. Those are two of my favorite games of all time. Breath of the Wild is up there as well. But, we had a lot of controversies in the gaming industry. The new console generation with Xbox One, PS4, and Wii U was a shit show. There's no way around it. Like, they sucked. They put the hardware above Wii U, not so much, but PS4 and Xbox One definitely put the hardware above the software, and it's been what, 6 years since the PS4's release, and how many good exclusives does it have? Let's just try to count them out. Like, we'll go ahead and say Horizon Zero Dawn is worth of shit. Uncharted 4, God of War, Spider-Man, Bloodborne. That's 5. 6 years, 5 were the exclusives. Xbox One, I can only think of one, and that's Sunset Overdrive. Now, granted, I'm not as big of an Xbox guy. Wii U, Mario Kart 8, Smash Brothers, Breath of the Wild. 6 years since 7 years in the Wii U's case, and only 3 really big exclusives. And then the Switch came out, and the Switch started killing it, and it's great. It's a great console. I'm hoping I get one for Christmas. Breath of the Wild came out on that as well. Great game. Pokemon Pikachu, Let's Go Pikachu, and Let's Go Eevee are actually going to get me into Pokemon, because it's like, oh my god, it's like the entire appeal of Pokemon for me, which was never in the games, is actually in the games now. Yeah, Blade Charge. I would say I want more new games to turn into series. The video game industry is especially stagnant, which is saying something considering how movies have been this decade. Gonna mute myself real quick while I take a drink. Professor Atlas said Dark Souls is my favorite game of the decade and of all time. I like Bloodborne. I think Bloodborne's a lot of fun. Not really my cup of tea. I don't really like the whole difficulty for difficulty's sake. But when it comes to getting my Soulsborne on, I'll take Bloodborne over Dark Souls. Bloodborne is just a lot more interesting aesthetically. Halo 5 was a goddamn fucking train wreck. Don't give me that bullshit. No. Halo 5 killed the franchise. Gravity Rush was alright. But yeah, you had like the loot box controversy, which it's not gambling. It's something scummy, but I don't think loot boxes are gambling. I never liked the whole pay to win thing, and that's what loot boxes are. It's pay to win, but even worse because it's pay for the chance to win instead of being actually pay to win. Gamergate and the downfall of gaming journalism. Let's talk about that for a beat. This is a good place to bring this up. Another defining part of this decade was cancel culture. and the outrage against cancel culture. And I would say it technically started in the 90s. Yeah, we're going way back for this. Because what is cancel culture? So, someone goes against the industry wisdom and says something out of line, or says something that is accused of wrong thing, or does something that goes against like what the mainstream media wants. Then the accusations come in. So and so is a pedophile. So and so is a child abuser. So and so, does drugs. So and so said the N word on stream once. And then the hashtags start. And people ignore context, they ignore history, they ignore common sense. And the person's career is put into jeopardy because of trial by media. That's what happened to Michael Jackson in the 90s. And again in the 2000s. And it ultimately took his life in 2008. Because he died of a drug overdose. Drugs that he started taking because of all the stuff he was going through. And in hindsight, the whole Michael Jackson trial by media was a test run for the Me Too movement. There's a lot of similarities between what happened to Michael Jackson and what's been going on with people like Vic Mignogna, Kevin Spacey. Whether they're guilty or not should be up to the courts. Should be up for the courts to decide. It shouldn't be CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC. It shouldn't be their job to tell you who should and shouldn't be canceled. And that's kind of the insidious nature of that. And that brings us to Gamergate. Because Gamergate was a big deal. And it's something we still kind of see to this day. Because a lot of the same people who were in power in 2014 when Gamergate started are still in power and still making games and still talking about games and still doing game journalism. We're kind of hip to the fact now that the mainstream media is bought out. And this goes for all the industries as well as politics. It's become abundantly clear since 2016 that there is no objectivity when it comes to the media. And it's a dying form. I'll get to this when I get to TV, but television in general is dying and being replaced by the internet, slowly but surely. And there's been a lot of... they are not going down without a fight, and they're trying to bring down anyone that they see as part of the blame. Which is why you get people like 60 Minutes trying to attack people like Steven Crowder. Because Steven Crowder is, he's a late-night comedian who isn't on late-night television. He's on the internet. But he still styles a show off of, like, a late-night talk show. And he talks to some pretty, powerful people. He's done lots of interviews with, like, Ted Cruz and stuff. And he goes so against the grain and speaks out against the prevalent wisdom that people like, primarily NBC, because NBC is the people who run Vox. NBC, one of the biggest news organizations out there, attack him. And we see this elsewhere too. PewDiePie, the biggest YouTuber, and YouTube hates his goddamn guts because he's independent. He doesn't need YouTube's lawyers. He can buy his own. He doesn't need Time Magazine. He's bigger than Time Magazine. So what does Time Magazine do? They try slandering him. Same thing with the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal tries slandering his ass several times throughout the decade because they don't like him because he's an outsider and he doesn't play by their rules. PewDiePie doesn't play by the rules of Wall Street Journal and NBC and YouTube, and neither does Steven Crowder, neither does Razorfist or Sargon of Akkad, and they're the ones who come under fire. And there's no way to stop them without pulling authoritarian bullshit that's gonna hurt people on both sides. No, right now, because the thing about outrage culture is that it never stops. The left will eat their own when they are starving. When they run out of dragons to slay, they will start killing themselves. And we're seeing that with, right now, J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling's getting canceled. Why? Because she defended someone who said that there are, physiological differences between trans women and biological women. No, this person lost their job pointing that out, and J.K. Rowling defended them. J.K. Rowling, the same person that was like, Hermione was black the entire time, and Dumbledore was gay the entire time. That same person is now getting canceled just for speaking sense for a few minutes, for a single tweet. And asking people to actually look at the context and go about this in a smart way. See, also, ContraPoints. I have my complaints against ContraPoints. I think she's stupid. I think she's a really stupid person. But she doesn't deserve to get canceled. Yet her own fan base recently has turned on her just for, actually having a little bit of respect for actual science. And it's really messed up. And you see this a little bit on the right too. No side is without blame. You have people like Ben Shapiro attacking. Who did he go after? He went after somebody. I don't remember, but I'll point out Ben Shapiro's comments about Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, a man who's proven innocent on all accounts, including misdemeanors. They couldn't even get him on the misdemeanor child endangerment for having kids at his theme park without any kind of safety regulations. They couldn't even bust him on that. But Ben Shapiro thinks he was guilty of running a pedophile ring, and his evidence is hearsay told by a guy who waited 10 years after Michael Jackson's death and precisely 1 year after getting fired from a Michael Jackson tribute tour to make a documentary. So the right is guilty of this too. The right is just as guilty of outrage culture. They actually used to be the only ones guilty. It used to be the right that would try to cancel people, and the left that would defend them. It goes back and forth. In the 80s you had Tipper Gore trying to cancel metal music. In the 90s you had Jack Thompson trying to cancel video games, and now it's the left trying to cancel comedians and late night talk show hosts and YouTubers. So it does go back and forth. Both sides are guilty, but this decade, more than any other decade before it, is one where people just started wisening up to their bullshit. And that's how we got Donald Trump elected, is people not taking what NBC and CNN say seriously. People stopped taking them seriously sometime around 2015. Actually, for my money, it was actually sometime around 2014 when they perpetuated the whole hands up, don't shoot shit in Ferguson, which is when I was personally red-pilled. So, yeah, they're dying, and it's this grasp for control, and we see that especially in the video game industry. And I can point out all sorts of examples. I can point out the Anthem controversy. How someone blew the whistle on that because Well, he had the insider info because he was, before that he had been jerking BioWare off and got, got enough cum on his hands to be like, wait a minute, this is kind of gross. This is kind of a gross metaphor. I could talk about Metal Gear Solid 5. And talk about the fucking review boot camps. Hideo Kojima, his goddamn self, basically locked a bunch of journalists in a fucking internment camp to play Metal Gear Solid 5 with a chicken hat on, avoiding all the side ops and side quests and mother-based missions in order to just play the story all the way through. And all these review outlets gave it a 10 out of 10 without saying what actually happened. Most recently, Death Stranding. 2 for 2 on Kojima this decade. There is no goddamn conceivable reason why Death Stranding was nominated for jack shit in the Video Game Awards. The only reason is because Jeff Keighley basically wants to suck Hideo Kojima's dick IRL. And he's part of the picking committee, and has been every single year of the VGAs. He's the only reason why it got nominated. And if he could, he would have made it win too, which is, he did for Best Director. But Death Stranding got so much flack that there's no way that they could have gotten away with giving it Game of the Year, so they gave it to Dark Souls meets Tenchu instead. But, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the whole, like, outrage culture and how it kind of loops back around into this idea of the outsider, completely changing the way things play out. Yeah, I think I covered... Oh, there was also the explosion of mobile gaming, especially with Pokemon Go. That was also 2016. Best games of... I'll just list the best a couple games from each year. 2010 we had God of War 3, Mass Effect 2, and Red Dead Redemption. 2011 we had Arkham City, Skyrim. We actually had a bunch of good games in 2011. 2011 best year for games this decade, 2011. Worst year for games this decade, I'm gonna withhold judgment on 2019 until I actually play Jedi Fallen Order. But outside of that, I'd say the worst year was 2012. I couldn't find any good games from 2012. Like, the best was, like, Far Cry 3. 2012 was the year that gave us, like, Mass Effect 3 and stuff. So, yeah. Best year, 2011. Worst year, 2012. The only other years I would say were even remotely good were 2018, 2010, 2018, and maybe 2017. Every other year for game was just abysmal. And so now let's move on to television, which is actually the section I have the least amount of notes on. The 2010s was the decade when television became irrelevant. But at the same time, it became more relevant because it just switched mediums. The whole network, the whole dogmatic networking system started falling apart when I was in middle school, when we had things like TiVo and DVR coming out. But the internet really took it to the next level. Because nowadays, all the biggest and best shows are on the internet and not on television itself. And because of that, we started getting subscription services. And I predict within the next 10 years, there will be a package thing. Kind of like how cable works, where, or I should say cable worked back when cable was relevant. So you pay, your $100 or so cable bill, and then that money basically gets distributed based on how much you watch certain channels, and that's what we called ratings, and you know how many people tuned in to what shows at what times and what channels, which time slots, etc. Uh, and so then I predict we'll have that where we pay like $100 for this package that comes with every subscription fee, with every subscription service. Because there's a lot of them now, and they've all kind of like inhabited different niches and have different things. It's a fairly competitive market right now, and I actually like it. It's not good for my bank account. It's not good for anyone's bank account. You know, $10 here, $10 there. You really are spending $100 on this stuff. But now you have, you know, obviously the big one, Netflix. But you also have like everything from Rooster Teeth First, Verve, Crunchyroll Premium, Hulu Plus, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, the Warner Brothers one, the DC streaming service that's actually really nifty because it not only has movies and television shows, but it also has comics you can read. You have all that stuff. Uh, Disney Plus, and they all have these different shows. You know, like Netflix had Orange is the New Black and House of Cards and Daredevil, Jessica Jones, the Netflix Marvel stuff that they have going on. All these Netflix original movies and documentaries, like The Irishman, is supposedly like really big, and it's probably gonna get some Oscar nods. And then you have, uh, you know, Disney Plus has The Mandalorian. It's gonna have Clone Wars season 7 coming out later, you know, next year. Uh, as well as like all these classic Disney movies and television shows that people are revisiting now because, well, they bought Disney Plus to watch The Mandalorian, and now they got all this other stuff they could do. Yeah, Hulu Plus, you got Game of Thrones coming out on that came out on that. Game of Thrones being probably the biggest show this decade, for better or worse. I don't have any comments about its quality because I did not watch Game of Thrones. Now Crunchyroll Premium is where, you know, most people get all their anime, and this has been a really good decade for anime. You had, just listing some off the top of my head, My Hero Academia, biggest shonen since Naruto. Place Within the Universe, that show makes me cry on a regular basis. Quintessential Quintuplets, one of my personal favorite things ever. Kaguya-sama Love is War came out earlier this year. Demon Slayer is really good. You know, JoJo finally got an anime adaptation this decade. Dragon Ball Super returned Dragon Ball to form in many ways. And became like the top rated cable program of the year. For several weeks straight. Gonna mention Gravity Falls, but Gravity Falls was actually just on Disney Channel. That's another one I would say is one of the best shows of the decade. Now Amazon Prime has its own anime, but it also has like a lot of really cool old movies and other shows like The Boys is the big one that's on Amazon Prime. Uh, yeah, Rooster Teeth First. You have Ruby and Genlock, or had Genlock, I should say. Genlock is going to move on to HBO Plus. But yeah, you have all these things, and it's really making TV outdated. And even as far as not just, you know, cartoons and sitcoms and dramas go and detective shows and shit, but also news. People don't watch the news anymore. Like it's been just nothing but declining ratings for CBS and CNN and NBC, and you know you have people like Steven Crowder and Dave Cullen and Mike Kurz. They're pulling bigger numbers than the actual cable news networks, and it's kind of baffling, honestly. And I think it's a good thing. I think the power of the internet really decentralizes power away from the few and into the hands of the many. It's a very libertarian thing, so long as, you know, sites like YouTube back the fuck off. And that's Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say about television. I didn't have as much to say about that. But let's talk about Hollywood. Where to even begin? Hollywood had a lot of the same issues that the video game industry had. Uh, but they didn't have as many exceptions, I find. And part of that has to do with, again, this whole decade, I think, is defined by the outsider. You know, everyone from Lil Nas X to fucking Donald Trump. love them or hate them, like they are these outsiders that defy explanation. You know, Donald Trump is, someone from the business sector. He's a billionaire who didn't spend billions. Uh, constantly attacking the media and saying inflammatory stuff, not playing by the rules, very much at war with his own party as much as he is the opposite party. No history, no prior history with politics or military yet. Not only did he win, but he's done a rather good job, to the point where they just the only thing the opposing party can do is this whole impeachment thing, which I'll get more into detail in my year in review stream, but that's a whole shit show and a half, and it's such a partisan hack issue. And by those exact same merits, you had this 19-year-old black kid in a fucking cowboy hat making a fucking cell phone jingle Vine song and out competing people like Taylor Swift and Justin Bieber with it. Film does not have that going for it because the movie industry has become so homogenized, more so than it was a decade ago. Whereas music, games, television, they became less homogenized. Movies became more homogenized. It is now completely in the hands of just a few studios. You got Disney, you got Warner Brothers, and then you have like Paramount and MGM, and then basically no one else. And all these indie markets are getting bought the fuck out by these big movie studios, and it's creating this paradigm where you don't have anything really fresh and new. Say what you will about The Last Jedi, and I have in the past as a mini, but it at least had some ideas. It at least did stuff. It did something we hadn't really seen before. And it did on a AAA, Hollywood budget with, backed by Disney and Lucasfilm. It was Star Wars, biggest franchise possibly ever. So then what's Moonlight's excuse? Moonlight, this quote-unquote indie film that's supposed to be all like, dark and gritty and raw and real. And oh my god, I've never been so bored by a Best Picture winner in my life. And that's basically the entire indie film industry. It is the indie film industry this decade is just as lifeless, just as saturated, just as hollow as the biggest movies. And the biggest movies are actually the ones with the ideas and the new shit that no one had ever done before, and the emotions and the characters people care about. Let's talk a bit about the MCU, because the MCU is absolutely the most dominant force in movies this decade. I was looking at the top box office, things, the movies that have topped the box office this decade. 2012, 2013, 2016, and I believe 2017, and definitely 2018 and 19. That's 6 out of 10 years. The top box office setter was an MCU film. So 6 of the biggest movies this decade came from the MCU. And I know the MCU technically started in 2008, but I think going into this decade, nobody suspected how big it would get. They thought like, oh yeah, it was gonna flop or whatever. Avengers came out in 2012, and everything started chasing it. That was the big trendsetter. That's another reason why I think this decade really started in 2012. Because in music, 2012 was when we had somebody that I used to know by Gautier, and we had the Avengers out in theaters. Comic book style continuity, which had only been done in comic books and occasionally TV shows, got put on the big screen. And not only did people love it, people were able to follow it, because that was always the big risk. Most TV studios even didn't think that people, particularly young kids, had the attention span to follow continuity. Dragon Ball Z changed that in the late 90s, early 2000s. It proved that kids didn't have that kind of attention span, and Avengers brought that to the big screen in a big way. Not only are the biggest movies of the decade MCU, but some of the best movies of the decade are from the MCU. My pick for the best movie of the decade is a toss-up between Inception, which came out in 2010, and Infinity War. Because Infinity War was unlike anything I had ever seen before, and it was big, and it was bombastic, and most impressively of all, it worked. And that in and of itself was an accomplishment more worthy than the $2 billion it made in the box office. And that's kind of a general trend with the better movies of this decade, is they worked. And because they worked, they were instantly better than most anything else. The biggest animated movie of the decade was Frozen. And the best, I think, was... Well, actually, I think the best was Song of the Sea, which is an indie film. But the best big one was Inside Out. And both of those were really provocative and challenged people's emotions in a way that only the best of Disney had done before. And that kind of became the norm. To the point where right now, kind of getting sick of it. I kind of just want something a little more simple now. Now, not every animated film needs to be Zootopia. But yeah, the downside of this decade has really been the nostalgia baiting, which movies were all about adaptations. They've always been about adaptations ever since the 1920s. Like most movies that came out in the 1920s were adaptations of old books or plays. And that tradition kind of continues to this day. You gotta have... If you're going to spend $1 billion making a movie, you kind of want to make sure that you have an audience. So you have to either get a really bankable star like The Rock, a really bankable director like Chris Nolan, or a really bankable property like Hunger Games. Or Harry Potter, which was, last decade, but it ended this decade. It ended in 2011. So before the decade really started. And I think that is another thing that kind of contributed to Avengers' success, was, moviegoers wanting something to kind of fill that Harry Potter-shaped hole in all of our hearts. And we weren't going to get that from Star Wars, that's for sure. Oh, God. I am not looking forward to talking about Rise of Skywalker in my year in review stream. I'm not really looking forward to watching it. So I've been talking for about an hour and 13 minutes now. And... I'm gonna do what I kind of do with music, and I'm just gonna list either the best or some of the best movies from the years. Best year for movies, 2010, definitely. 2010 we had Inception, Toy Story 3, The Fighter, 127 Hours, King's Speech, Winter's Bone, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. All 7 of those movies I just named are really fucking good. But, because perfectly balanced, as all things should be. 2010 we also had, The Last Airbender. 2011, we had Hugo and Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. And Super 8 was alright. X-Men First Class was pretty good. Uh, that was also the year we had the first Thor and Captain America movies. Nothing else I could really remember. 2012, we had like Silver Linings Playbook, which the more I think about that, the more I don't like it. Argo, which was pretty good. Avengers, which was phenomenal. Dark Knight Rises, which was kind of a disappointment, but in a way that kind of made sense. In a way that like, oh well, of course it's not as good as Dark Knight. What is? 2013 is my pick for worst year in movies. The only movie really noteworthy, I think, was Gravity. And even then, it was like really sappy and melodramatic and kind of up its own ass. 12 Years a Slave was alright, I guess. Iron Man 3, kind of fun. One of the weaker Marvel movies. Thor the Dark World is probably the worst Marvel movie. That came out in 2013. 2014, contender for best year in movies, I think. You know, that was where we had Captain America Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Birdman, Whiplash, and, was it the year we had Whiplash? This might have been 2015. No, 2015 was Spotlight. 2015, that was the year, the big winner that year was Spotlight. So yeah, we had all those, and we also had Song of the Sea, which I absolutely adore, and I would love to do a video on Song of the Sea at some point. Because it's one of those movies that not enough people talk about. And when it comes to me doing videos on things that I love, I prefer doing things on stuff not as many people talk about. It's why I did that video of Phoebe in Wonderland last year. It's why I'm working on that on a quintessential quintuplets video series breaking down the entire manga right now. Then 2015, Jurassic World was fine, I guess. Force Awakens I really like still. I'm actually probably gonna sit down and rewatch Force Awakens and Last Jedi sometime this week before I go see Rise of Skywalker. 2016 was another bad year. That was one where we had X-Men Apocalypse and Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad. But we also had Captain America Civil War, which is one of my favorite Marvel movies. And Doctor Strange, which is pretty good as well. 2017, that's another contender for worst year. I was looking at like movies of 2017, and the only one that really stood out to me as good was Logan. And let's be honest, Logan's not all that great either. It's good. It's like an 8 out of 10 though. It's not the best. 2018, nothing even comes close to touching Infinity War. There are other movies that came out last year that I liked. Into the Spider-Verse is one I know a lot of people clamor on about for reasons that just kind of baffle me, honestly. But yeah, nothing touches Infinity War. In 2019, haven't seen very many movies in 2019. It's, you know, fresh year. I don't go to the movies very often, so I have to kind of wait until things start really coming out on DVD. But I really like Shazam, and I was satisfied with Endgame. And just the fact that I was satisfied with Endgame is kind of enough for me to put it in the top spot because of how much hype I had with Infinity War and how much I love Infinity War. I guess some other awards here. Breakout actors. Jennifer Lawrence, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Tom Hardy, Chris Pratt. They all kind of came into their own this decade and were really good. Best animated film, Song of the Sea. Breakout directors, the Russo brothers, which that is one way where I think movies kind of fell into the zeitgeist of The Outsiders. Notice a lot of the best Marvel movies come from either these really quirky directors that nobody had either nobody had ever heard of or nobody really was willing to give a bunch of money to. Like Taika Waititi, James Gunn, Shane Black, the Russo brothers coming from a TV background. sorry about that. Wrapping up. I mean, what else happened? Like, Twilight and Harry Potter ended. We had the Hobbit trilogy. Boy, that was a waste. That was a waste of fucking movie release weeks. Just the MCU dominating. So yeah, it's kind of all I had notes on. That's kind of the 2010s in a nutshell. I'll probably talk more about as far as culture stuff goes in my year in review stream, which will be here in the next week or so. It'll certainly be after Christmas. I try to have that as close to New Year's as possible, but it won't be on the 29th, I know for sure, because it's my friend Dashi's birthday on the 29th, and I'm gonna hopefully be joining her on her birthday stream over on her channel. But I'm pretty sure anyone watching this, it's been an hour and 20 minutes. 6 people, I think. At most, we had 12 people at one point. So I'm pretty sure you're all subscribed, but I would highly like if you all followed me on Twitter at EA Mediaocrity4, joined the Discord, link is in the description, and supported my Patreon. I'm going to start having some awards for patrons. Professor Ellis asks, have you heard of Danganronpa? Heard of it, not interested. I don't like the premise. I'm not interested at all in the premise. So I'm going to start having some Patreon rewards. I am in the middle of editing the audio for my very first Quintessential Quintuplets breakdown video, and I will have the audio of that, or at least, a version of the audio of that on my Patreon for patrons. All you have to do is donate $1 or more, and you will have access to that audio close to a month before the video is ready for YouTube. Or before I'm willing to release the video on YouTube. And you will get that video if you support my Patreon for the month of January. You will get that video 24 hours before it's up on there. As will all my honest looks. Ruby season wrapping up here in the next few weeks. And I'm going to start doing honest looks again. And when I do, I will have the audio uploaded on Patreon for patrons as soon as I have it done. And then the full video will be up for patrons 24 hours before it's up on YouTube. I'm really trying to encourage people to support my Patreon because it makes everything I do here possible. Or more possible, I should say. It really helps out. The more people I have supporting me on Patreon, the less I have to worry about what I'm going to eat. And the more time I can spend actually, focusing on videos and fan fiction in my book. Still, first draft is still done. Haven't really started on the second draft. I will have more announcements of that in the coming months when I start working on the second draft again. Follow my Twitter for all of that. Follow my Twitter and join the Discord if you want up-to-date information on everything. Professor LS asked Ace Attorney. I've seen some gameplay of it. I was on one of Raymond's streams when he was streaming Ace Attorney. Raymond Neal loves that franchise. I've never actually played it myself, though. So I gotta wrap up here. I gotta get ready. I'm gonna have company over. And so thank you all for watching once again. And I'll see you all